Okay, as I said, thank you, Ms. Beles and everyone for having us this evening or this late afternoon. You know, my experience as the Chief Assistant District Attorney of Alameda County has enabled me to personally understand the strengths, weaknesses, and potential of the office. You know, I think the next district attorney has to be someone who can build working relationships with all of the local police departments, the newly elected county sheriff, the Alameda County courts, and the board of supervisors so that we can provide effective law enforcement with safety and justice as the main components of that system. You know, since the primary, I've been endorsed by 4 of the 5 members of the board of supervisors and 12 of the 14 mayors in Alameda County and a host of city council members and all of the members of the assembly in the district of Alameda County. And most importantly, the top law enforcement officer in the state of California, which is Attorney General Rob Bonta. And I think that this is important because I think that what they've all seen in me and my candidacy is, you know, despite being in the district attorney's office for 32 years, what I bring is balance and experience. You know, I think that you are asking us to take over $100 million government agency with 450 employees in 3 divisions and be able to run that operation effectively and importantly, to keep the community safe, but also make it a justice system that has fewer disparities, more opportunities to put yourself on a different path. And when everyone walks away, they can be proud of the criminal justice system that we built in Alameda County. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Price, your opening?
Thank you for having us this evening and for convening this gathering, presumably predominantly of lawyers, because as lawyers, we have a special relationship and a special responsibility for the criminal justice system in Alameda County and how it impacts the residents. I'm running for district attorney because I am a drum major for justice, because I have been a resident of this county since 1978, with a brief period when I went and purchased the house because most people can't purchase here. But I've been an active member of this community since 1978, working with nonprofits and community organizations and working on issues that have impacted the community. And for 30 years, having a successful practice representing everyday people and solving problems in Alameda County. And so I'm going to be honored to be the next district attorney. I'm a survivor of the Ohio Juvenile Justice and Foster Care Systems, and I'm a survivor of the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, which sought to unlawfully prosecute me or wrongfully prosecute me. And so I bring a lens that the residents, I believe, will benefit from having someone with a fresh look. Everyone in this race has agreed that the criminal justice system is broken. It is not working for victims. It is not working for families. It's not working for those who are accused of crime. It's not working for small businesses. It's not working for residents. And so we clearly need change. The status quo must go ultimately. And the only way that we will have new policies and a different result and outcome for this community is if we have new leadership. And that cannot be from someone who has been there for 32 years, who has participated, profited, and prospered in a broken system. We have to come from a different perspective, and that's what the community is asking for. That's why we won the primary. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask the first question, and Mr. Wiley, you will answer first. If elected district attorney, what are your top 3 priorities?
Well, you know, what we have right now in Alameda County is, and there was a recent poll that just in the city of Oakland, 70% of everyone who lives in Oakland feels that they are less safe today than they were a year ago. So I think that the #1 priority has to be the surge in violence and serious felony crimes that are currently being committed in the city of Oakland in particular. But also we've seen an uptick in crime throughout the county and throughout the Bay Area. We've seen increases in auto thefts, auto burglaries, home burglaries, retail thefts. All of this has, we've seen huge increases. We've seen increases in anti-Asian hate. And so I think that you have to be prepared to address the violence and serious felonies that are being committed in Alameda County. I think secondly, we want to expand dramatically those who are eligible for drug diversion and mental health treatment. We have some really good programs in Alameda County, and we have to make sure that everyone who is eligible is getting an opportunity to put themselves on a different path. And then I think we have to continue to be sensitive to the crimes that are impacting women, crimes that are impacting children, and crimes that are impacting the vulnerable. There's going to be a real focus on the individuals who are committing those crimes, because at the end of the day, we want Alameda County to be a place where people feel safe. People feel safe again to go out to lunch or go shopping without fear of having their car broken into, or having their women having their purses stolen, or somebody sticking a gun in your face and robbing. So those would be our top 3 priorities.
Thank you. And Ms. Price, same
Sure.
question. If you'd like me to
Yeah.
repeat the question, please let me know.
No, that's fine. Number one, we have to address the money bail system, which the California Supreme Court, as all of you know, as lawyers, has determined is unconstitutional. And so if your next district attorney, I cannot continue to support, condone, and maintain a system that violates the civil rights of the people who come in contact with our criminal justice system. And so I will work with our partners to establish a race-neutral risk assessment tool that focuses on the issues that are really determinative when you're looking at public safety and how we incarcerate people. It has been documented that the county spends almost $15 million a year to incarcerate people that ultimately the district attorney does not charge, or the charges are dismissed without prosecution. And so we need to close that gap and that hole. Number 2, we need to address gun violence in our community. I do live in Oakland and live in East Oakland. And so I'm acutely aware of the challenges that we face here. And so we intend to create a commission on gun violence prevention that will bring together survivors and family members and law enforcement to figure out what our best gun reduction strategies are that will work in Alameda County. We will have a deputy of gun violence prevention who will oversee our participation in the numerous efforts that are already ongoing from community-based organizations that are trying to address this. Youth Alive, BOSS, we are blessed with a plethora of community organizations that are engaged in violence interruption. And number 3 would be to conduct an immediate assessment of the current criteria and the resources available for our alternative courts, which have been documented have not been used effectively, that the goals need to be increased, the resources and the services, and we have to create pathways for people with mental illness so that we stop over-criminalizing those folks.
Thank you so much. The next question, which I think touched on a little bit in the first, but Ms. Price, you will be answering it first. What specific standards or policies will you put into place regarding pretrial detention, bail, and release, especially with allegations of serious and violent crimes? And to riff off what you just said, how is your priority about the cash bail system going to be implemented within the office?
Yeah, certainly we know that the office has not focused on serious and violent crime at the level that it needs to, that the focus has been on primarily low-level misdemeanors, and I think over 70% of the resources of the prosecutions documented have been of low-level misdemeanors. And so in the meantime, the violence, guns have exploded in Alameda County. And so I have to address that from the perspective of public safety and looking at the pretrial detention, those cases where people otherwise would have been incarcerated, to the extent that we can create community-based accountability situations for them. That will be our focus, so that we're not over criminalizing and over incarcerating people in Santa Rita County Jail that we know are not a risk to the community and are not likely to be a flight risk. Those are the fundamental things that one needs to look at when you're trying to determine who is being incarcerated pre-trial, and how are your resources being used. And certainly under my administration, I will have the deputies prioritize serious violent crime and figuring out what resources do we have to address those people who may in fact be eligible, unfortunately, for bail, or not necessarily unfortunately, but it's not based on their money, but they have the criteria and the resources that we can in fact release them without danger to public safety. But we want to make sure that we're not releasing them and then just forgetting about them, so that we are in fact monitoring what is actually occurring in the community as part of our responsibility to protect public safety.
Thank you. And Mr. Wiley, I'll ask the question again, maybe with a different riff. What standards or policies will you put into place regarding pretrial detention, bail, and release, especially with allegations of serious and violent crimes? Especially with allegations of serious and violent crimes within the community?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, I think what everyone should understand, in most misdemeanor cases, if the individual doesn't have a series of prior convictions or does not have any other pending cases, those individuals are generally site released. So they're given a ticket and they're asked to be back in court on another day, on a date in the future. And many times the individuals that are actually arrested and taken to Santa Rita jail are the individuals that are charged with a serious or violent felony. So if you look at the number of individuals that are currently incarcerated in Santa Rita, many of them are there for either a serious or violent felony, or they have not only outstanding cases in Alameda County, but many times they have cases in other counties, and they have warrants and holds. And there's a number of different reasons why some of these individuals are in custody. But let's assume you get an individual who has committed a serious or violent felony, such as a robbery. Well, look, I understand the argument that we want to have zero bail and that it's unfair for someone who comes from means to be able to get out of custody, while someone who comes from a poor background does not have access to bail. I understand that. And I think that, and I'm not necessarily opposed to that, I just think that you have to have some pragmatism in the way you address it, because the safety of the community has to be paramount. And if you commit a robbery and you stick a gun in somebody's face, I'm not in favor of zero bail. I'm in favor of you being held in custody because you pose a threat to the community. And I think that you have to use some pragmatism so that individuals are not going out and committing serious and violent felonies, and then we're letting them out of custody where they can reoffend. So I think you have to bring pragmatism in your approach to the whole bail system.
Thank you. So the next question, Mr. Wiley, you're going to answer first. And the question is, what is your stance on the pursuit of the death penalty by the district attorney?
I've stated from the day I got in this race that I oppose the death penalty. And the reason I oppose the death penalty is because I think that there has been too much disparity in its application, not only in California, but around the country. And I will not seek the death penalty on anyone if I'm elected the district attorney.
Thank you. Ms. Price, the same question.
I'm sorry, what is the question, please?
Sure. The question is, what is your stance on the pursuit of the death penalty by the district attorney's office?
Okay, my position is that this DA's office has over-prosecuted Black and brown people, particularly with respect to the death penalty. We have a deputy district attorney who retired from Alameda County District Attorney's Office and bragged that he had committed more people to death row in Alameda County than any other prosecutor in the country. And that is a horrible legacy for us. The numbers of people who are on death row from Alameda County are far too high. And I will be using the provisions that the legislature has provided for us and essentially commanded district attorneys in California to look at those death penalty cases, particularly under the Racial Justice Act, and to move as quickly as you can to remedy the harm that has been caused by the past policies of mass incarceration. And so I understand that as the next district attorney, I have an obligation mandated by the legislature, as well as the voters of this county. We have overwhelmingly voted against the death penalty. And our district attorney's office has consistently been using the death penalty, even when there's been a moratorium on death penalty cases. And so we're going to stop wasting taxpayers' dollars charging the death penalty when we know that we're not going to be able to prosecute that. And it doesn't make any sense. And so I strongly believe that the death penalty has been misused in Alameda County, that it creates an urgent need to address the wrongs of the past, particularly with respect to race, particularly with respect to gender, and that we will look at those cases and with a strong eye to complying with the Racial Justice Act and making sure that we are moving forward, that we have a completely different lens that we address public safety.
Thank you. Ms. Nieves and I were texting. We may have some follow-up questions on that issue a little bit later, unless Ms. Nieves turns on and says we should do them right now.
We can reserve it.
Okay, great. We'll keep the planned questions going. So Ms. Price, you're going to be answering the next question first. What is your actual plan for addressing the mental health needs of people arrested for and charged with crimes in Alameda County?
The Department of Justice is a major determinant of what we're going to do going forward. They've given the Board of Supervisors notice that if we do not aggressively create community-based options for treatment of people with mental health issues, mental illness, that we're going to be placed under receivership. We know that there is a consent decree that has been put into place over the sheriff. We know that I know that there's civil litigation pending around the way that the district attorney's office has been processing and prosecuting people with mental illness. And our position in this campaign is that mental illness is not a crime. People who commit crimes based on their being in a mental health crisis or having a mental health condition that leads them afoul of the law will not be treated like criminals. The DOJ, I look forward to working with the DOJ and the Board of Supervisors and behavioral health to develop and create, as well as community-based organizations that are already trying to do this. We have a backlog and a funnel where we are not using the resources. For instance, the full service partnership that the DA has control over and has a big participant in, the DOJ says that is woefully underused. So I'm going to be looking to create those full service partnerships, to look at the criteria for our mental health court, the resources that we have, and to expand both eligibility as well as dramatically the number of cases that we are processing through our mental health court. When we look, there were like 2 cases a month. We've got to do much, much better. The crisis is upon us. And we have been endorsed by the families of the seriously mentally ill. We will be working with them to ensure that their loved ones are not being cycled between Santa Rita County Jail and the street and John George.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Price. Mr. Wiley, what is your plan for addressing the mental health needs of people arrested for and charged with crimes in Alameda County? Especially
Yes.
maybe in response to some of the things that Ms. Price just said.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think what was important and what we've been doing in Alameda County is what was happening was someone would be having a mental health episode, and there was really no option for law enforcement to take the individual other than to John George or to Santa Rita. So what we created was, it's called the CARES program. Our first CARES unit was set up in the Fruitvale in Oakland, in which we trained law enforcement that if you arrest someone who's having a mental health episode, you can bring them to the CARES unit. And at the CARES unit, we have a licensed psychologist who can do mental health assessments. We have an individual who's called a lived experience person. And this is someone who's either previously had their own mental health issues or substance abuse issues, or previously incarcerated, and they've overcome that. They've gone through the training and taken the courses, and now they're there to identify with the person who comes in, so that the person has someone that they can identify with and relate to. And then, of course, we have clothing and food and bathing facilities. And once the person is assessed, so if it's someone that maybe needs a 48-hour hold at John George, then they would be transported to John George. Or if they need something beyond a 48-hour hold, they can be transported to a bed that's county provided. The program was so successful that the county has now approved funding for 2 additional care centers, one in the South County and one in the East County. I'm also on the committee of reimagining adult justice, and there's a series of changes that are coming to the way we deal with mental health cases, particularly providing medical coverage for a lot of the homeless, because a lot of times that is a roadblock to many of them getting the kind of treatment that they need.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. And Ms. Price, I just would give you an opportunity for an immediate follow-up. Do you have any specific plans other than what you'd mentioned for mental health needs of people? We just got some chat going on it.
Sure. I mean, as I indicated, one of the things that is critical is working with the families, and that is not happening. And so I definitely will be working with the families who have firsthand experience with our system and how we're dealing with it and how much time do I have? I'm sorry.
Just 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. Yeah, working with the families for sure, and making sure that their input is valued and that their suggestions are considered, and that we are doing as much as we can to keep people out of the criminal justice system. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Price. That was a little, that was a little, you know, I just put that in there, but I thought it was appropriate. So Ms. Nieves?
Sure. So, Ms. Price, we're going to start with you. Please share your plans for community outreach across all of the diverse communities of Alameda County and the promotion of diverse members within the district attorney's office.
Sure. Having been a resident of Alameda County for this many years, more than almost 40 years now, I appreciate the diversity that we have that extends from Albany to Fremont and Union City. It is quite amazing. And I tell people as I walk and talk in all the different communities that we live in a bubble. And we all know that, whether it's the Asian community or the Hindu community or the Latino community, or the Black community, we all live in a bubble. And so we're blessed to be here, and we have the opportunity to engage with community. And I've been doing that for about 40 years now as a member of this community, working with nonprofit organizations. And that's why we've been endorsed by the Hindu American community and the Latino Task Force and APALA, and folks from around the county from different, ethnicities, religions, backgrounds, because we have demonstrated that we will be working with folks on the ground. One of the things that I have articulated and will champion is language justice. Our DA's office does not provide diversion services for non-English speaking people, and that is intolerable under the current administration. So that is a status quo that has to change. We have to have language appropriate services. One of the things I'm really inspired by the opportunity with our neighborhood courts is to engage with community leaders in particular ethnic communities to help them. And they've pretend they are excited about the possibility that we're going to partner with folks to create the neighborhood courts and to create opportunities to hold people accountable and to solve problems based on culturally competent approaches and understanding.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. Same question, your plans for community outreach across the diverse communities of Alameda County and the promotion of diverse members within the district attorney's office.
Yes, thank you for that question. Well, I'm currently the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the District Attorney's Office. And so I really understand the importance of having a diverse office. And it's been something that I've championed very early in my career. And the District Attorney's Office in Alameda County has more African-American DAs than all 5 surrounding DA's offices in the Bay Area combined. Now, where we are lacking, and I've made a point that we are going to improve, is in the area of Asian prosecutors, because Asians make up 32% of the population in Alameda County, and they're less than 20% of our workforce in the DA's office. And so we've got to up our game in terms of the recruitment of Asian prosecutors in the DA's office. But I think, when it comes to community outreach, there's a reason why I just recently received the Oakland Boys and Girls Club Game Changer Award. And it was due to the work that I've done with our youth in the community. I think that it is the youth that you have to try and impact before they enter into that junior high and high school range and can find themselves involved in the criminal justice system. And in terms of the API, I've been endorsed by the API community, the Indian communities, and I've been very, very active with those communities. And, particularly with when the anti-Asian hate crimes started occurring in 2020, I made a point of going and spending time in Oakland, Chinatown, and also Little Saigon, and really getting to know a lot of the business owners and kind of understanding how all of this was impacting their businesses and just impacting their lives in that particular part of the city. And I think those are the kind of things that are very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. The next question may actually intertwine with the last, and you will be answering first. And if my dogs are barking, I do apologize. Please discuss the specific steps that you would take to institute the spirit and requirements of the Racial Justice Act within the district attorney's office.
So when I took over the role as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the first thing I did was I created a 4-module implicit bias training. And that training is required by every employee. And it doesn't matter whether you're an administrative employee, a lawyer, or an inspector in the DA's office. Everyone is required to go through the 4-module implicit bias training. Module 1 teaches them about the science of implicit bias and the fact that we all come to these jobs with our own implicit biases that are shaped by our life experiences, just a number of different things. And then module 2, we think, is the most important because we focus on the historical perspective of implicit bias, and we show them how different government policies and private actions have contributed to our views of different peoples. And we really focus on the policy of redlining and how we show them maps of the 1920s in Oakland, for example. And we show them how West Oakland and East Oakland were redlined and how the Fruit Belt was redlined. And that when you look at how it's playing out today, these are the same areas where you have the lowest socioeconomic output. You find greater disparities in health, education, and wealth. And so the point we try to make to our employees is that simply because you get a case out of East Oakland and it happens to be an African-American, just understand that there's a lot of government action and a lot of private actions that have contributed to these areas being the way they are. And those areas aren't that way simply because Black people or Hispanic people live there. And the whole idea is for them to bring a little more compassion to the job.
Thank you. Ms. Price, please discuss your specific steps that you would take to institute the spirit and requirements of the Racial Justice Act within the District Attorney's Office.
Sure. First, let's be clear. The Racial Justice Act specifically provides that the state shall not seek or obtain a criminal conviction or a sentence on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin. Those things were highlighted and the act was passed by the legislature because that's exactly what the state has been doing. Prosecutors have been at the heart of mass incarceration and at the heart, the instigators. Studies have shown it's been prosecutors that have been the drivers of racial disparities within our criminal justice system. And so based on that data, the legislature passed this far-reaching law that as your next district attorney, it will be my honor and privilege to implement. It provides, we touched on this earlier, people with death sentences or facing deportation are eligible first to apply for the removal of the death penalty and the reduction of their sentence. The law provides that a person convicted or sentenced in violation of the Racial Justice Act shall not be eligible for the death penalty. So as a DA, I've got to look at those death penalty cases. Then over the next 3 years, eligibility includes people incarcerated for felonies, people with recent convictions, or people with older convictions who are no longer incarcerated. So we've got to move to implement each phase and each part of the Racial Justice Act to remedy the harm that has been caused by the way the system has been operating, particularly in Alameda County, really since the 1930s. We have not had an elected district attorney since 1939. And so we have had a system that has been passed down, and is particularly vulnerable, has been vulnerable to the kind of racial disparities that have infected it because there's been no accountability and no oversight. And so as the next district attorney, I get to implement the Racial Justice Act, and that's what I've been doing for 30 years. So it's going to be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Price, what is your position about blanket policies within the district attorney's office, such as jail sentences for gun cases or the timing of the providing of discovery?
Sure. We have to follow the law. That's my position, is that this district attorney's office is full of lawyers who are subject to the state bar rules of professional conduct, who are subject to the rules of discovery that have been mandated by the United States Supreme Court, the California Supreme Court, who are subject to the rules of law that have been established for immigration, consideration of immigration consequences, all of the things that are clearly mandated. We have to follow them. And we need a leader that will hold the deputies accountable and make sure that the standards that we are not only putting on paper, but that we are actually following and implementing are being used to benefit the people of this community. So I do believe that when the legislature says we have to follow the Racial Justice Act, we have to do that. When the legislature says we have to stop using gun enhancements, we have to stop doing that. When the legislature says we cannot impose life without the possibility of parole on juveniles, we have to stop doing that. Those standards are clear. And what is equally clear is that the leadership of this office needs to follow the law and insist that the people who work in this office follow the law. And so that's my approach to it. I don't have any reason to think that the lawyers who work for the government in Alameda County are not lawyers, are not subject to the state bar rules, are not subject to the rules of law that have been laid down by our courts or by the legislature. And I will establish specific guidelines, and we will have accountability measures where we are actually tracking what is happening in cases. And if a deputy is in fact violating the rules and the standards that the law sets, we will hold them accountable. Just last week, oh, I can't go into that. Thank you.
Thank you. But before I go to Mr. Wiley, I wanted to clarify what I think this question was aiming at also, and give you an opportunity to respond. One of the things that happens in the Alameda County DA's office right now is that there is, on any gun case, the offer is going to be 120 days in county jail at a minimum. And no, they don't want to give you swap. No, they don't want to change it. That's just a blanket policy within Alameda County DA's office that can be rather frustrating if the circumstances differ, but every gun case that comes through, you're looking at a 120-day offer. That blanket policy is not set by statute. What is your position on policies created internally?
Yeah.
So she gets to answer this question twice.
Excuse me?
She gets to answer this question twice.
You're going to have the same opportunity to answer the question, and this is a specific portion of the question that I'm asking for clarification on.
And is it 30 seconds?
30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Yes. The internal policies of the district attorney's office will be reviewed for fairness to determine whether or not these policies are in fact serving the interest of the community, whether they're actually protecting public safety. The kind of policy that you described may or may not be consistent with public safety, because we know that each person brings an individual profile and an individual issue. And so those kinds of things will be reviewed, and we will be revising them. We are going to have a commission that's going to look at policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wiley, I'm going to ask the question for you, and we're going to do 1 minute and 30 seconds. What is your position about blanket policies within the district attorney's office, such as minimum jail sentences for gun cases, or the timing of the providing of discovery, or, as I mentioned, internal 120-day minimums on gun cases?
So on discovery, you know, I will have little patience with discovery, not providing discovery in a timely basis. Now, however, with that said, you know, when I came into the district attorney's office back in 1990, the discovery typically amounted to police reports, tape statements, cassette tape statements, and maybe photographs of evidence. And that was about that was the majority of the evidence that you would generally have to provide discovery of. Then DNA came. So you then had DNA put into the mix. Then PDR tapes came, where everything is being recorded. So, you know, a lot of what DAs are tasked with today can be very complex if you have multiple witnesses and you have multiple PDRs that you have to get a hold of. And so sometimes it can be a little timely, and sometimes things can be missed through the cracks. But all in all, I believe that, you know, as the district attorney's office, we are supposed to provide discovery in a timely manner. Now on and what was the other question besides the discovery?
The
policies. Yeah. You know, and I must, when it comes to one size fits all policies, I'm generally not in favor of that. I'm generally not in favor. I'm more in favor of looking at cases on an individual basis. You know, I think that the current policy, and I'm not going to argue with you about whether that's actually the current policy or not. But I think that when you look at these one size fits all policies, you know, people come to us from different circumstances, and they may be in possession of a firearm, and the person may have no record, and the person may have previously been shot or been a victim of crime, and they're terrified of going outside the house without being armed. And that's a much different circumstance than someone who's armed with a firearm. And you find that they have an extensive criminal record, and more likely than not, they're armed with that firearm to use it for a criminal purpose. So I think you have to look at each individual case. But I think, we also are in a situation where guns are out of control in Oakland. And you have to have some policies to basically let folks know that we're not going to tolerate people riding around with guns under their driver's seat.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. And I think that one of the things that you just talked about also dovetails, we didn't do this intentionally, with the next question, and you are answering the next question first. What measures will you institute to ensure that Brady is complied with by all members of the district attorney's office?
Well, that is going to be something that's going to come from the very top. Should I be blessed to be the district attorney of Alameda County, everyone will know that discovery violations will not be tolerated by any of our DAs. Now, do I have confidence in our DAs? I have a lot of confidence in our DAs, that they are going to follow the law and provide timely discovery. And if it's brought to my attention that someone has not provided timely discovery, and it's intentional, then they're going to have a big problem. So, one thing is just training our DAs when they first come into the office, and really making sure that their ethical center is set in terms of what we expect from them as deputy district attorneys. And we expect our deputy district attorneys to be honest and forthright and provide discovery in that, and one overall message that no case is worth their reputation in this profession, and that we expect them to perform at the highest level of ethical conduct.
Thank you. Same question to you, Ms. Price. What measures will you institute to ensure that Brady is complied with by all members of the district attorney's office?
We will look at, initially, we intend to look at those cases where it has been documented that Brady has been violated. We've committed to do a look back for at least 7 years. And even, most currently, the last week or 2 weeks ago, there was a hearing in the case of People versus Maurice Scott, where the court ended up having to dismiss a case because of Brady violations. The public defender's report from March of 2021 documents a pattern of misconduct over the last decade. And so we will look at those cases and we will take, complaints from people and make sure that we are documenting the pattern, what has occurred, and that we are making sure that we're moving forward, that it will be clear to the deputies in the office and to the public that has a right to expect that we're going to be following the law, and that we're not going to pop up at the last minute on the day of trial with some exculpatory evidence and just say, ooh, and that there's not going to be any consequences to that. The public has a right to know if cases are being dismissed because of prosecutorial misconduct, and that we are in crisis in terms of allowing people who may have committed serious crimes, that they're getting to walk free, and we have no options for holding them accountable because our deputies did not do their job correctly. And so it's a very serious matter where we have Brady violations, and we're going to send the message to the deputies in the office. And I think they've gotten that message. The Prosecutors Association has spent over $200,000 to make sure that Mr. Wiley is elected. And so that the status quo will continue to be, but the status quo must go. It will change under my administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Price, is the prosecution of human trafficking cases a priority for you, and how would you implement that priority?
Absolutely. And when I say that, I must distinguish that I will not be prosecuting women as the current administration has prioritized. The statistics on the number of women who are being prosecuted and survivors of Trafficking in this community is abominable, and it will not continue under my administration. We will treat survivors and their families with compassion and with dignity. We will create our court for survivors and dealing with human and labor trafficking, both sex trafficking and labor trafficking will be modeled after the Don Court in Philadelphia, which has, I think, a 70% success rate of folks graduating from the program. We're going to expand services for sexually exploited youth to include males, not simply focusing on females, and also addressing foster youth who constitute a huge portion of those that get caught up in human trafficking. I'm particularly sensitive to that. As a former foster kid, I understand what it means to be emancipated and to be trying to make it on your own, and what those, how we have to work with community-based organizations that are on the ground, reaching out to young people. And my current priorities and my solutions are going to be published this week in the Oakland Post. I've been endorsed by Oakland City Council President Nikki Fortunato Bass, who's very concerned and working in partnership with residents in her Oakland neighborhood, where there seems to be a prevalence, particularly of sex trafficking. But we know that human trafficking is the big issue. We are still the third hotspot in the country, despite all the things that have been done over the last 10 years. And so we know that the status quo has not worked, and we need some new and innovative approaches. I'll work with the local school districts and the Alameda County Board of Education so that we're intervening with young people who are vulnerable to that.
Thank you. Mr. Wiley, same question. Is the prosecution of human trafficking a priority for you, and how would you implement that priority?
Absolutely. And, I would just say this about Nikki Fortunato Bass, that she probably should have thought about that before she led the fight to defund the police and led to a reduction of about 100 officers in the Oakland Police Department. So let me just say that, the Alameda County DA's office has been one of the leading offices in the country when it comes to human trafficking. It's been a major focus of ours in Alameda County because Oakland is one of the human trafficking hubs between Los Angeles and Las Vegas and Oakland. Those are the three major human trafficking hubs on the West Coast. And so we've had a lot of experience in, I would say that of the different types of individuals that we have to deal with that come through the criminal justice system, it is the girls that are being victimized by human trafficking that are also the most difficult population to deal with, because many of them come from abused homes. They've suffered, they've been raped as adolescents, and they just come from some real broken circumstances. And so one of the things that we did in the last 12 years is we created safety net. So many of these girls that are at juvenile age, we have a safety net program at juvenile where we bring in all of the different parties, the public defender, behavioral health, probation, and we have a collaborative meeting to discuss, what is the best way to help this young girl. There's a number of innovative programs that we've implemented in Alameda County to deal with this particular population. And since I've been running, I've met with several of the experts who have their own community-based organizations that deal with this population, because the particular area that Nikki Fortunato Bass deals with, a lot of the girls have moved to that area, and it's a real problem.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. I
Can I
appreciate.
respond to that, please?
You have 30 seconds to do so.
Thank you. I'm not here to defend Ricky Fortunato Bass, but I am here to defend the residents of Oakland, of which Mr. Wiley is not one and has no clue. In 2016, we lost 9 police chiefs in 2 weeks because of a sex trafficking scandal that implicated everyone from beat cops, command officers, and ultimately the chief of police. That sex trafficking scandal by Oakland police cost us millions of dollars, and none of the officers involved were convicted of any major crimes by the district attorney's office.
Thank-
So don't blame Nikki Fortunato Bass for the
Thank you, Ms.
DA's failure.
Thank you, Ms. Price. I would hope that we could continue to keep this as cordial as I know both of you are. Mr. Wiley, the next question is, what experiences do you have that make you the best candidate in terms of managing a large team of lawyers, knowing the Alameda County legal community, and being active in the Alameda County legal community?
I think it's very important. When you first come into the district attorney's office, you really just kind of put one foot in front of the other, particularly in your first 4 years. And then, and about year 4, you start trying cases. Well, then once you get beyond trying cases, should you be blessed enough, you get different assignments, and eventually you might make it into managing a misdemeanor team or hopefully a felony preliminary hearing team or a felony trial team, all of which I did. So I really understand the inner workings of the office. And then once I moved into the broader scope of the office, you begin to see other aspects of the office. Like when I ran our juvenile division, there's a lot more interagency connection between the DA's office and all these other agencies. Then when I became the chief assistant, I began to have to deal with the budget issues and preparing $100 million budget for 2022-23, and understanding all of the intricacies involved in that. So for example, we have a $98 million budget for this upcoming year. 75 million we get from the county, but the other 23 million comes in the form of federal and state grants. So you have to be also versed in how to go obtain those grants. But once you get those grants, how do you manage those grants? So there's a lot of complexity to the job. Consumer and environmental protection has a lot of complexity over there. And it's just a very difficult job to walk into, never having been a prosecutor, never having managed anything more than a 4-lawyer law firm. And then you have to now come in and deal with human resources. You have to deal with all of these police agencies. You have to deal with consumer and environmental protection. There's a lot to the job, and I have the experience.
Thank you. Same question to you, Ms. Price. What experiences do you have that make you the best candidate in terms of managing a large team of lawyers, knowing the Alameda County legal community, and being active in the Alameda County legal community? And I might actually, from one of the chat, I would only add one question in terms of the criminal law community. Someone had asked about experience as a prosecutor, and so I'll include that in here.
Okay, obviously I have not been a member of the DA's office for the criminal law community since 1984, when I started at Bayview Hunters Point Community Defender's Office. However, as a civil prosecutor, I am a member of the California Association of Consumer Attorneys. In 2022, I was the member of the year for the Alameda Contra Costa Trial Lawyers Association, which includes criminal defense attorneys. I'm a member of the National Lawyers Guild, and I was honored as their champion of justice in 2016, which includes criminal defense lawyers. I have been a lifetime member of Charles Houston Bar Association and a 2-time recipient of the Clinton Wayne White Trial Advocacy Award. And that organization also includes criminal defense lawyers. I'm a member of the Alameda County Bar Association, and I've worked with the Wiley program, which is a Bay Area legal incubator program. The complexity of the job is not something that is overwhelming to me. I have managed teams of lawyers successfully for decades, including the large team, the national team that went to the United States Supreme Court and won the Morgan case. I worked with the Employment Law Center over many years. And so I have a lot of experience, not only working collaboratively with other law firms and legal organizations, but also managing the San Francisco Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, which I can assure you was more than 4 lawyers. And we had to budget ourselves and hire people in the midst of some very challenging circumstances. I've also been the court-appointed monitor for Contra Costa County, for about 14 years and oversaw the EEO function of the entire Contra Costa County. And I've also been appointed by the court to monitor the reform of the California Criminal Department of Corrections. And I've been to prisons throughout the state, which allows me to have that perspective as well.
Thank you, Ms. Price. Now, there are a number of questions and comments in the chat about safety and robberies in Alameda County. And the next question for you, Ms. Price, is what can you do as the district attorney to enhance the lives and safety of the residents in Alameda County?
As a longtime resident of Alameda County, I know that it is critical that we hold police accountable. Years ago, I represented the first female homicide detective of Sacramento County, and I learned then what is a homicide solve rate. And if you live in Oakland, I came home and asked the question, what is the homicide solve rate for Oakland, where I live? And this is in the 1990s, and I was told it's about 30%, which means if you kill someone in Oakland, you have a 70% chance of getting away with it. And I think that a large part of that is the failure of the district attorney's office to hold these departments accountable, not just Oakland, but Hayward, who I've sued, San Leandro, Union City. We see just recently a $21 million verdict against Pleasanton, against Fremont. We've seen millions of dollars of verdicts across the county against law enforcement, and there's been no accountability whatsoever for how they do policing. Are they held to a constitutional standard? And as a district attorney, I will hold them and inform them that there is a constitutional standard, that you are mandated, and that the services that we are paying for need to be provided to the residents. And that's the expectation. I've trained police departments, including San Mateo County Sheriff Department, Yolo County Sheriffs. So we will have I have no problem working with law enforcement and helping them to understand, what do you need to do to improve your solve rate? What do you need to do to improve your response rate? Because I live in Oakland and I know that what we're paying for, the response rate, when somebody stole my car, I didn't get a good response. And we know that. At the same time, we will support the officers who in fact are engaging in constitutional policing and are willing to partner with a district attorney that has integrity and will be accountable to the people of this county. And that's my commitment. And I think that will improve public safety.
Thank you, Ms. Price. Mr. Wiley, the same question. What can you do as the district attorney to enhance the lives and safety of the residents in Alameda County?
Yes, thank you for that question. But if you do notice my opponent, that her theory of improving the safety of the community is to prosecute the cops. Okay, let me tell you that what my theory is. Crime is being driven by 59 gangs that currently occupy the city of Oakland. They commit one out of every homicide. They are either the perpetrator of the crime, they are either a witness to the crime, or the victim of the murder. They are driving 50% of the violent crime in Alameda County. They are also driving a lot of the thefts that you are currently seeing. And it's unless you're prepared to deal with these gangs, you are going to see a high rate of individuals carrying guns in the community, because some of the reasons people are carrying guns is out of fear for their own safety. Those who live in the areas of Oakland, including East Oakland, which Ms. Price said in our last candidates forum, that she lives in East Oakland and East Oakland is not violent. And I would just say, open the newspaper or listen to the news. There's at least 2 murders a day going on in East Oakland. And so I think that you have to be prepared to address the gangs that are literally wreaking havoc on the city of Oakland. And we do not have enough police officers who can properly police the city on a 24/7 basis with only 623 officers. Oakland needs at least 1,000 police officers to properly police this city, given the level of violence, given the level of serious crimes that are occurring on almost a daily basis. And we have a clear plan of how we want to address the problem with our crime strategies unit.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley.
Can I respond, please? He said two things that he says I said that are not true. I'd like to be able to respond.
Okay, Ms. Price, I think we've given you a lot of time to respond. I will leave this up to Ms. Nieves, who asked the last question.
I haven't responded to what he just said, Ms. Beles. I'm sorry, I have to
You know,
disagree.
I know, but
Yeah,
we try to keep the timing, equal.
Let's
So
just
I
go.
agree, and I try, the process should be.
So
equal.
instead of the back and forth, let's just do 30 seconds because we're just going to eat up time with that. So 30 seconds, and Mr. Wiley, if you want to rebut to the rebuttal, you can have 30 seconds as well.
Thank you. Mr. Wiley is not the source. It should not be the source for anything I say. So please fact check everything he tells you that I said. And in fact, if gangs are running loose in our community, they're doing so on his watch. And my view is that the district attorney's office has failed us in terms of crime prevention. That's why the pandemic, all of that is on his watch. And so there has to be accountability. I said for police, I didn't say the theory is to prosecute cops. I talked about training and standards and collaboration.
Thank you, Ms. Price. Mr. Wiley, did you have anything to add, or?
I just think if you want to talk about how do you make people feel more safe, then it's logical you have to talk about dealing with the individuals who are doing the shootings, dealing with the individuals who are sticking guns in people's faces and robbing them. Dealing with the individuals that are breaking into cars and breaking into houses. That's who you have to deal with in order that people feel more safe.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. Were you completed?
Yes.
Thank you. This is our last prepared question, and I'm sure Ms. Nieves and we've been looking at the chat pretty carefully. The other thing, since this is our last question, but League of Women Voters reminds us, and they are seasoned at this, that we would prefer that the candidates address the group, not one another specifically. That's the same thing in court. But last prepared question, maybe a couple other ones from the chat. Mr. Wiley, what specific aspects of the current practices in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office would you change, if any, and why?
Well, I think that the biggest thing I will change is really getting everyone to understand the importance of expanding access to substance abuse treatment, and really understanding that I've seen an astronomical growth in the number of individuals that are suffering some form of mental illness. And it's not just with adults, it's also with juveniles. And the legislature has taken away a lot of the tools, for example, in juvenile that the courts use to monitor kids who were truant. Kids who are truant because they're suffering from adolescent depression, and then they self-medicate with marijuana and wind up not going to school. And the courts no longer have the ability to monitor those kids that are truant, and it is the kids that are truant that inevitably wind up getting sucked into the gangs. So it would be a high priority to bring the unified school districts, the police, probation, and the district attorney's office together to come up with a system now that the courts no longer have the tool to order a parent or a kid in the court who is excessively truant. And how do we deal with that? How do we create a format to dealing with the kids that are truant? I mean, that's one area and then the other on the adult side is really expanding the opportunities for people to get drug treatment and mental health treatment. I think that it's very, very important. And then jobs, making sure that I contacted the CEO of the Oakland Port because the Port of Oakland has about 5,000 jobs. And what we're trying to do is come up with a procedure for making those jobs available to those who are returning from prison and those who are coming back from substance abuse treatment or mental health treatment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. And to you, Ms. Price, what specific aspects of the current practices in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office would you change, if any, and why?
Well, I would change the persistent disregard for the Brady Act and ensure that we are complying with our obligations under the law to disclose exculpatory evidence. That's clearly a critical area for improvement for the DA's office, and I think for the criminal justice system. I will, as I've indicated, stop prosecuting survivors and victims of sex trafficking in this community and focus on attacking the problem by those who are in fact enabling it and fostering it and creating the opportunities for human trafficking in this county. I will address gun violence far more aggressively than the DA's office has currently. Obviously, the DA is not dealing with gun violence effectively, and if you know who the 2,000 people are that are committing all the violent crimes, the question is, why are they still committing violent crimes if you know who they are? And so we've got to address the prevalence of guns in this community and make sure that we are engaging young people in a way that they don't feel like they have to pick up a gun, and that we're addressing those who are bringing guns into our community. I will be very aggressive about stopping the flow of ghost guns into this community, as well as the sale of illegal guns to minors and to people who should not have guns, those who have demonstrated challenges with anger management or domestic violence. The DA has an obligation to make sure that we are the ones that stop the proliferation of guns and the pervasiveness of guns in this community, because studies have shown where you have more guns, you have more gun violence. Finally, I want to make sure I touch on the racial disparities, which are absolutely infected in this system and have been normalized for at least the last 40 years. We have got to root out the racial, gender, and economic disparities that have been allowed to be just part of the way we do business.
Thank you for that. So Ms. Nieves and I have called a couple of the comments. And the first question, and I would ask that Ms. Price answer this, is combined. How long have you lived in Alameda County, and how many criminal cases have you either defended or as a defense attorney or prosecuted as a district attorney?
I moved here in 1978 to go to law school. I stayed here until 1989 when I bought a house in Hercules, and I came back to East Oakland, as Mr. Wiley pointed out, in 1997. So that translates to about 30 some years. And I've worked in this community pretty much most of that time. As a criminal defense lawyer, I started off in Bayview Hunters Point Community Defender's Office. My first trial was a felony trial. And I did dozens. I didn't count how many trials I did there, both juvenile and probation revocation hearings. I cut my teeth at the San Francisco Hall of Justice. I then participated in Alameda County's referral panel for about a year in Alameda County doing some criminal cases, but not any trials in Alameda County. As I indicated, I was prosecuted by the Alameda County District Attorney's Office as a young single mom when I was in an abusive situation, and I had to go to trial in that case and be acquitted by a jury of my peers because I was a victim of domestic violence. And we know that that is continuing to happen. I'm the co-founder of the Bay Area Defense Committee for Battered Women, where we advocated for women in Alameda County who were being prosecuted and incarcerated by the DA's office. I also served as an intern for Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, which also was involved in representing women who were incarcerated and trying to help them maintain their legal rights post-conviction and their access to children. And I've counseled a number of families around their visitation rights through my familiarity with the California Department of Corrections and the various institutions we have around the state.
Okay, and just one follow-up. When was the last time you participated in a criminal law action?
February of 2020. I attended a bail hearing as part of a support network, which was pretty horrendous, where we saw some pretty outrageous conduct by the district attorney. And I don't have time to talk about that, but that was February 2020, right before the
No,
pandemic.
my question is, when was the last time you represented someone in a criminal hearing?
Yes, ma'am. I did not do the hearing. I represented the mother of the person who was the subject of the hearing. I collaborated with the Alameda County Public Defender's Office as a private counsel to the family. So I didn't call, and there was actually no hearing, quite frankly, but we were there.
But Ms.
Yes.
Price, the real question is, when was the last time you appeared in front of an Alameda County court as the attorney of record in a criminal case?
Oof. Trying to think. I did not appear in February 2020. Like I said, there was a hearing, sort of, kind of. I think it would have been, oh my Lord, I don't know. I'm sorry.
Great.
I've been representing people for 30 years
Yeah.
in Alameda County. I have no idea. It could have been in the 90s. It could have been in the 80s.
Okay.
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And Mr. Wiley, same question to you. How long have you lived in Alameda
Yeah.
County? And how many cases have you either prosecuted as a deputy district attorney or defended as a criminal defense attorney over the years?
So when I started in the DA's office in 1990, I lived in Alameda County until about 1995. And when it came time to buy a house, I could not afford to purchase a house in Oakland. And so I purchased a house out in Solano County. And I lived out there until April of 2020. I moved into Oakland, and so I've been in Oakland since. But since I worked in Oakland, I've been very active in the Oakland community. That's why I've been endorsed by the Oakland NAACP. I received the Game Changers Award from the Boys and Girls Club of Oakland. And that's because I've been active in the Oakland community. I've received a number of endorsements from the faith community in Oakland. And just like I said, I've been very, very active. And in fact, in 2021, I received the National Bar Association, which is the equivalent to the American Bar Association, but it's the African-American version of the ABA. I was the first prosecutor in the 95-year history of the National Bar Association to receive the Human Sweat Civil Rights Award because of my work in the community. And I've also been endorsed by civil rights attorney John Burris. I've been endorsed by Benjamin Crump, Lanita Baker, all leading civil rights attorneys in this country. And they've all endorsed me because they know of my work in the community and what I stand for.
And Mr. Wiley, approximately how many cases have you prosecuted as a district attorney or defended as, I don't know if you've ever been a defense attorney in
I've never been a defense attorney, and I've prosecuted, I don't want to say thousands, but I've prosecuted hundreds of cases. And I've also prosecuted some of the most complex criminal litigation in the history of Alameda County, including the Ryder's case, which was an 8-month trial and one of the longest criminal trials in the history of California. So I have an extensive trial record.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Nieves, we only have a little bit of time, perhaps just that middle question that we discussed.
Sure. So I
Well,
have,
actually, maybe we can fit in both, but they're actually individual to Mr. Wiley, one for Mr. Wiley and one for Ms. Price about prior questions.
right, exactly. So Mr. Wiley, there was a follow-up for you regarding the death penalty question. And it said that you have previously stated that you would not push to resentence people on death row to LWOP, so life without parole, sentences if the victim's family opposed resentencing. Are there any circumstances in which you would go against the victim's family and resentence someone to LWOP?
I think that if I felt that a victim's family was being unreasonable, given the circumstances of the case, I could see myself doing that. I just think that, for example, one of the last death penalty cases in Alameda County was an individual who went to a residence, and an 8-year-old girl was over at a sleepover at her friend's house, and she was walking to the door. The family said, "Don't answer the door." And before she could leave the front of the door, the defendant put 10 bullets through the front door and killed her. And so before I would take a position on a case like that, I would want the input of that little girl's parents and how they felt about it. So that's what I said, is that I'm not going to just make a unilateral decision without the input of the families who've been victimized by the person on death row. But I could see myself making my own individual decision if I felt that their position was unreasonable.
Thank you for that. And Ms. Price, the follow-up question regarding death penalty for you was, what is your stance on pursuing the death penalty within the DA's office?
My understanding is that the DA has been pursuing death penalty cases where it was clear that they weren't actually going to do the case as a death penalty case. In other words, at some point that added special circumstance would be dismissed before the trial, and it would never go to the jury. And that makes sense, since we have a moratorium on death penalty cases imposed by the governor. But charging the death penalty case, it creates costs. It escalates the cost for the public defender. It escalates the cost for the district attorney. And so certainly, as the next district attorney, I am not going to waste taxpayers' money on a frivolous or a futile act. We will not be charging death penalty cases. That's clear. And the voters of Alameda County, I have to repeat, we have voted overwhelmingly against the death penalty. We cannot have a district attorney that consistently rejects the views of the voters and, for instance, opposes Prop 47 or opposes Prop 57, who wants to charge juveniles as adults, who wants to impose the death penalty. That I will not ignore the will of the voters of this county or the actual, circumstances that the law exists at this time. And I will not be using and charging the death penalty in Alameda County. Not to mention the racial disparities, but we don't even have to get into it. Has already been determined in California and in Alameda County that the death penalty is not what we want, okay? And the research, the data is clear. It has been imposed in this county, as well as across the state, as well as across the country, in a racially disparate manner. And so we're not going to do that anymore.
So is your stance anti-death penalty for Alameda County District Attorney's Office?
I don't know what that, we don't call it anti-death penalty. We have a platform online that says, I commit that I will not charge the death penalty in Alameda County.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
So so we've reached the end, and because of how we started, Ms. Price has 2 minutes for closing. We're gonna just be tight, and Mr. Wiley has 2 minutes for closing. Ms. Price.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, and I'm glad. It looks like we got a fair gathering of lawyers. This is so important. This is the first time since 1939 that the public has an opportunity to select a district attorney who was not appointed. I'm the first person to run since 1966. And the legal community has a special role to play because people are going to ask you, who should you vote for? And the question and the differences between my opponent and I could not be more profound. The question is, do we continue to do it the way to administer justice in the same old way, broken system that has gotten us here, where we do have guns that have just flowed into this community. We do have a public safety crisis. We have a mental health crisis. We have a youth crisis where we got to deal with young people who have been charged and prosecuted as adults. We have a death penalty crisis, which the Racial Justice Act was enacted to remedy. Or do we take a different approach and move beyond the status quo and step forward to really bring someone into that office that has been in this community? Proximity does matter. Who has been engaged with community organizations for decades, who is not a stranger to the legal community at all. I urge you to fact check Mr. Wiley, and I have to say it. He moved here in May of 2021, not 2020. And he is not endorsed by all of the assembly members. Assembly member Alex Lee has endorsed us. We've also been endorsed by the leading criminal justice reform organizations across the country and locally, from Oakland Rising Action and Bay Rising Action to John Legend and Courage California and Smart Justice and Real Justice. These are the folks that have been on the ground fighting for change and fighting for the civil and racial rights of people who have been victimized by this criminal justice system. And as lawyers, we should not continue to condone that. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And Ms. Price is correct. If I misspoke on 2020, it was 2021. I moved here. It's not anything I'm trying to hide. But I've been a prosecutor for 32 years, and I came to a district attorney's office that when you looked at the upper management of the office, it was predominantly white males. They were making all the decisions on who got hired, what the policies were. And I was never good with that, in that I always felt that we were in a very diverse county and that we needed a more diverse voice in terms of what our criminal justice system looked like. And I have fought and scratched my way up to the top. And while doing it, being involved in the community, and what I represent is someone who will bring you balanced and fair experience district attorney. But I will also be a loud voice when I see the Oakland Unified School District and I look at the year-end reading levels of third graders, and 70% of all white third graders are at reading level, and only 20% of the African-American third graders are at reading level. And what is being done to close that disparity? Because we know down the road, those are the kids that are going to come see me. So there are areas like that that go beyond the criminal justice system that I'm going to be a very loud voice demanding change. It is unacceptable that Oakland has over 100 homicides, and the next closest city is the city of Hayward, which only had 6 in 2020. It is unacceptable, and they need more police officers so that they can properly police the city and make it a less dangerous city. And I'm going to be a very loud voice for change. I agree with Ms. Price. There are too many disparities in the system, and we are going to work to close those disparities. But at the same time, you have to be prepared to run the district attorney's office. Thank you.
Thank you both so much, Mr. Wiley and Ms. Price. I really appreciate your participation and the cordiality that we extended to one another. I appreciate all of our participants, the co-hosting between the 6 Leagues of Women Voters and the ACBA, our staff, our wonderful timekeeper and chat monitor. Thank you, Ms. Nieves. Obviously, this was just a great forum. I really appreciate everyone's involvement, and ACBA and the League of Women Voters appreciates that as well. With that, I think that I can say that certainly the vote is important this year. And so
Yes.
Hopefully everybody gets their ballots. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having us. All right. Take care, everybody. Be safe.